Bluffing in poker is, at its very core, controlled dishonesty that everyone at the table has implicitly agreed to participate in. It is a sanctioned betrayal, a temporary suspension of the social contract wrapped in the guise of a simple card game. When you sit down at a poker table, you are entering a highly specific psychological arena, where playing the game means understanding this tension, this constant, silent negotiation between truth and deception in a completely safe space. We are taught from a very young age that lying is a moral failing, a corrosive habit that destroys trust and fractures communities. Yet, across the green felt of a poker table, deception is not only expected, it is mathematically, psychologically, and philosophically required if you want to survive. To bluff is to look someone in the eye and construct an alternate reality, banking entirely on your ability to sell a fiction. But what makes poker unique is not just the act of lying. It is the mutual consent to be lied to. Everyone at the table knows that the information they are receiving is tainted. Everyone knows that the bets, the body language, and the casual table talk are potential weapons. This transforms the game from a mere contest of probability into a profound reflection of human interaction, a laboratory for studying how we handle risk, trust, and our own physiological responses to stress. Part 1. The architecture of deception.
To truly grasp why bluffing is so central to this experience, we have to strip away the cinematic romance of smoky back rooms and sunglasses indoors, and look at the actual architecture of the game. Poker is fundamentally a game of incomplete information. This is the crucial distinction between poker and a game like chess. In chess, all the information is right there on the board. You can see your pieces, you can see your opponent's pieces, and the only variable is the human mind processing those positions. If you lose at chess, it is because you were outcalculated. Poker does not afford you that luxury of certainty. You only know your own cards and the community cards on the board. The contents of your opponent's hand are entirely obscured. You are forced to make decisions based on fragments of data, probabilities, and the story your opponent is telling you through their betting patterns.
Because of this incomplete information, the bluff ceases to be just a psychological trick and becomes a mathematical necessity. If you only ever bet when you held a strong hand, and you only ever folded when you held a weak hand, you would become perfectly predictable. Your opponents would quickly realize your strategy. They would fold whenever you bet, denying you any significant winnings, and they would bet whenever you checked, forcing you to surrender your weak hands. You would slowly bleed chips until you had nothing left. To prevent this, you have to introduce noise into your signal. You have to bet with bad hands occasionally to disguise the times you are betting with good hands. This is where the concept of game theory intersects with the felt. The decision to bluff is not random. It is a calculated balancing act. A well-constructed strategy requires a specific ratio of bluffs to value bets, bets made when you actually have the winning hand. When you make a bet, you're giving your opponent mathematical odds to call. If your range of possible hands includes the right number of bluffs, you make your opponent indifferent to calling or folding. You put them in a position where, mathematically, whatever choice they make will yield the same long-term expectation. You have effectively trapped them in a cage of your own design.
But a bluff is not just about raw numbers. It is about narrative. A successful bluff tells a coherent story from the moment the cards are dealt. If you decide to represent a powerful hand on the final betting round, but your actions in the previous round suggested weakness, a skilled opponent will spot the inconsistency. They will recognize that the story you are telling does not add up, and they will call your bluff. The architecture of deception requires you to build a foundation of credibility early in the hand, laying the groundwork for the lie you plan to tell later. You're essentially directing a tiny, silent play, making sure every prop and every action serves the final illusion. Part 2. The game that modeled the world. This structural reliance on deception did not just stay confined to the casino floor. In fact, the mechanics of bluffing in poker inadvertently laid the groundwork for modern strategic thought across economics, diplomacy, and warfare. To trace this evolution, we have to look at the work of the Hungarian-American mathematician John von Neumann. In the early 20th century, von Neumann was fascinated by poker. He realized that the game was not guided by probability theory alone. An unfortunate player who relied solely on calculating the odds would be easily exploited by an opponent who understood the psychological and strategic nuances of the game. Von Neumann wanted to formalize this dynamic. He wanted to mathematically prove the necessity of bluffing. In his landmark paper, 1928, Theory of Parlor Games, von Neumann tackled this exact problem. He analyzed a simplified version of poker and mathematically demonstrated that bluffing is not just a quirky human behavior, but an indispensable component of optimal play. He showed that a player must sometimes bet with a losing hand to maximize their overall expected return. If they never bluffed, they were leaving money on the table. This insight was revolutionary. It proved that deception could be quantified, modeled, and optimized. But von Neumann's ambitions extended far beyond parlor games. He saw that the dynamics of poker, the incomplete information, the hidden motives, the strategic deception, mirrored the complexities of real-world conflicts much more accurately than games of perfect information like chess. Together with the economist Oscar Morgenstern, von Neumann expanded these ideas into the 1944 book Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, which birthed the entire field of modern game theory.
Suddenly, the principles of the poker bluff were being applied to the most consequential decisions in human history. During the Cold War, von Neumann consulted for the United States military, using his game-theoretic models to analyze the nuclear standoff between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The entire concept of mutually assured destruction is deeply intertwined with the logic of the bluff. How do you convince an adversary that you are willing to launch a devastating strike, even knowing it will result in your own annihilation? You have to make your threat credible. You have to project a willingness to embrace irrationality, much like a poker player pushing all their chips into the middle of the table with nothing but high card. Former United States Secretary of State Henry Kissinger once noted a fundamental truth that applies as much to geopolitics as it does to a high-stakes cash game. A bluff taken seriously is more useful than a serious threat interpreted as a bluff. The historical legacy of poker is that it provided the vocabulary and the mathematical framework to understand how humans navigate conflict when the truth is hidden. The green felt was the original laboratory for the strategies that would eventually dictate global survival. Part 3. The Magic Circle of Deceit. Yet, for the average person sitting down for a Friday night home game, the appeal of poker is rarely about global thermonuclear strategy. The draw is deeply personal and intensely psychological. It centers on the concept of the safe space, or what the cultural historian Johann Huizinga termed the magic circle. When we sit at the poker table, we step inside a defined boundary where the normal rules of society are temporarily suspended. Outside the circle, lying to your friends about your intentions or your resources is a breach of trust. Inside the circle, it is the entire point of the exercise. This creates a fascinating psychological dynamic.
We're given permission to indulge in behaviors that are otherwise heavily policed by social norms. We get to be ruthless, we get to be deceptive, and we get to manipulate the emotions of others, all without suffering the real-world moral consequences of being a sociopath. The chips act as a buffer, a symbolic currency that absorbs the impact of our aggression. When the game ends, the magic circle dissolves, the chips are cashed out, and the friendships remain intact. The betrayal was purely structural. But your body does not always know the difference between a game and a genuine threat. This is where the tension of the bluff becomes a physical reality. When you execute a massive bluff, pushing all your chips across the line with air, your autonomic nervous system reacts. Research into the physiology of poker players shows that executing a high-stakes bluff triggers a significant spike in heart rate and the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Your body engages its fight or flight response. Your palms might sweat, your breathing might become shallow, and your pulse pounds in your ears.
Managing this physiological betrayal is the hallmark of a seasoned player. The term poker face is deeply ingrained in our cultural lexicon, but it refers to much more than just keeping a blank expression. It is about controlling the microscopic, involuntary physical cues, the micro-expressions, the trembling hands, the slight change in vocal pitch that might betray the lie. It requires an intense inward focus, a kind of forced meditation under pressure. You are trying to slow your heart rate through sheer force of will, projecting an aura of calm certainty while your internal alarms are screaming. Understanding this tension in a safe space allows players to explore their own relationship with risk and fear. It forces you to ask difficult questions about yourself. How do I react when I am cornered? Do I panic or do I calculate? Can I maintain my composure when a significant portion of my resources is on the line and my only defense is a fabricated story? The poker table becomes a mirror reflecting our baseline emotional volatility. By practicing emotional regulation in this controlled environment, players often find that their tolerance for stress and ambiguity in real life improves. The safe space of the game acts as a training ground for the unpredictable nature of reality. Part 4. The cultural legacy of the bluff.
Because poker touches on such universal human experiences, risk, deception, emotional control, and the reading of intent, it has left a profound mark on our broader culture. The terminology of the game has bled into our everyday language, shaping how we describe situations that have nothing to do with cards. When a business executive demands that a rival company prove they have the capital for a hostile takeover, they are calling their bluff. When a politician commits entirely to a controversial policy, risking their career on a single issue, they are going all in. When someone hides their disappointment after receiving bad news, they are maintaining a poker face. These metaphors endure because they perfectly encapsulate the mechanics of human interaction under pressure. They provide a shorthand for the complex calculus of navigating incomplete information and the perceived intentions of others. The cultural legacy of the bluff is the recognition that absolute truth is rare, and that most of life requires us to make decisions based on partial data and the perceived intentions of others.
We see this legacy playing out in modern business negotiations. A startup founder pitching to venture capitalists is in many ways executing a sophisticated semi-bluff. They might not yet have the revenue or the technology fully developed, but they are projecting confidence, banking on the potential of their hand improving by the river. They're asking the investors to buy into a narrative that is not yet fully grounded in fact. Similarly, the investors are trying to read the founder, looking for tells, trying to determine if the valuation being presented is a value bet or a complete fabrication. The beauty of poker as a cultural touchstone is that it strips away the moral weight of these interactions and reveals the underlying mechanics. It teaches us that deception is not always malicious. Sometimes it is simply a tool used to navigate a competitive environment. By engaging in controlled dishonesty that everyone agrees to, we learn how to protect ourselves against the uncontrolled dishonesty we will inevitably face in the world. We learn to question the narratives presented to us, to evaluate the motivations behind a bold claim, and to recognize that strength is often an illusion designed to mask vulnerability.
Ultimately, playing the game means accepting that tension is a fundamental part of existence. We are constantly forced to act without knowing all the facts, relying on our ability to read the situation and trust our instincts. The poker table just distills this existential condition into a manageable 52-card format. It provides a structured arena where we can practice the art of the bluff, test our emotional resilience, and confront the reality of chance, all within the comforting confines of a magic circle where the worst thing that can happen is losing a stack of plastic chips.
Share this episode with a friend who appreciates a deep dive into the psychology behind everyday strategies.